Hi, I'm Alison. Welcome to Dream Chasers Adventures in Happiness, where my band of superhero guests and I share with you tales of daring do, life-changing journeys towards living our best lives. If you're after an injection of inspiration and ideas to live the life that you want and deserve, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Hi there, and welcome to the show where we serve up conversation, concepts and belief that it is entirely possible to create what you crave. If there's something stopping you from pursuing happiness, whatever that looks like to you from a career or lifestyle point of view, the stories and insights covered here are designed to help. Today, I'm coming at you solo to talk about something that an awful lot of people struggle with: imposter syndrome. If you're someone who suffers from persistent self-doubt and second-guessing, if you feel like you're a fraud and worry that you're going to be found out, if you regularly question your own intelligence or abilities, or you have a perpetual fear that you aren't good enough, or your daily experience involves relentless worry, anxiety and overthinking, then this episode is for you. Imposter syndrome does nothing except get in the way of you fulfilling your true potential. It stops you going after your personal and professional dreams, and it feels bloody awful to boot. So in this episode, I'm going to delve into what imposter syndrome looks like so that you can judge for yourself if it's something you personally struggle with, why it isn't something that you were born with and therefore stuck with, where imposter syndrome actually comes from, and I'm going to pull on some brain science here to help explain it out, and really importantly, why it is totally possible to dissolve it and remove it once and for all. Hallelujah to that. So let's dive in. So what is imposter syndrome? Well, it's the experience of intellectual and professional fraudulence. It's the persistent feeling and belief that your success is not deserved, or that it hasn't been achieved as a result of your own efforts or skills. It typically manifests in three ways for people. So there are three types of thoughts associated with imposter syndrome. See if any of these resonate. The first category are thoughts that you might have and believe about yourself. So, things like, I'm not good enough, I'm not intelligent enough, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't have the skills, I'm a failure, I can't do this, and so on. The second category are thoughts you might have and believe about other people's views of you. So examples might include things like, they think I'm stupid, they think I'm incapable, they think I'm not worthy, they think someone else is better, they think I'm a fraud. And then the third category are thoughts you have and believe about how you compare to other people. So stuff like, they are better than me, they are more intelligent than me, they're more impressive or more skilled or more deserving than I am. Now, if any of this is feeling familiar to you, whatever thoughts you have, they've probably been with you a really long time, and they undoubtedly feel very true to you. And because of that, it's easy to make the assumption that this is just the way you are, right? It's just me, it's just part of my personality, and it's something I've just got to learn to live with and that I can't change. But here's the bombshell and the really good news. Imposter syndrome and all the related thoughts that you might personally experience with it is learned. It's not a part of who you are or how you were born, and it's not the result of any major deficiencies you might worry that you have, although I appreciate it might feel that way. It's actually born out of tough experiences that you've had or influences you've been exposed to, or both, either in childhood or sometimes later on in adult life. And those experiences or influences have shaped how you think about yourself, how you perceive others are judging you, and how you believe you measure up to other people. So they've effectively shaped your lens on yourself and the world around you, and you've learned to see yourself that way. Now, this is obviously easy for me to say, right? But I totally appreciate that it's difficult to believe or compute when it's something that you've probably experienced a very long time and that it just feels like the truth about you. So to help you make sense of it, I'm going to walk you through 5 brain science facts that explain how imposter syndrome is created and learned, proving that it isn't an intrinsic character trait that you're stuck with, and really significantly explains why and how you can unlearn it. So to set the scene, it's easiest to think about your brain as the hardware, right? The physical substance, and your mind as the software. So the conscious product of firing neurons in your brain. Your mind is basically a collection of memories, thoughts, emotions, and beliefs. And your brain responds to these by creating physical neural pathways for every single one of them. Because your brain responds directly to your thoughts, emotional patterns, and experiences, it has tremendous plasticity, right? So it's continuously changing and rewiring itself as neurons establish new connections and create new neural pathways every single day. So brain science point number one that's really important is that your brain is not hardwired, right? Your mind has the power to physically alter your brain and those neural pathways. Now, the second thing to know is that the more often you have a certain thought, the stronger your physical neural pathway associated with that thought becomes. So the more you think the same thoughts, the more those specific neural pathways strengthen and deepen, until really they become like well-worn trenches in your brain. These trenches become the dominant neural pathways, and therefore the easiest destinations for your mind to connect to, right? They're like the paths of least resistance. So important point number two is that repetitive thought strengthens specific neural pathways until they become the predominant channels in your brain, and therefore the primary destinations for your mind's thinking. Now, the third thing to understand is that you are highly prone to repetitive thought. According to the National Science Foundation, we all have up to 60,000 thoughts per day. And of all those thoughts, up to 95% of them are reruns, right? So we are literally thinking the same things over and over again. And, that might sound familiar to you. Now, there's a reason for this, right? Our brains are actually designed to conserve energy in case we need that energy for a fight or flight situation. It's an evolutionary thing, and it's part of our survival mechanism. But because it takes far less energy to process familiar thoughts than it does to think new thoughts, our brains have a very strong preference for repetitive thinking. So important point number three is that you are wired for repetitive thought. The fourth thing to know is that your mind works in conjunction with your brain to support this preference for repetitive thought. So this means that your mind is constantly looking out for evidence to support and prove that the repetitive thoughts you have are true, so that you can keep thinking them. It's why you've undoubtedly got lots of evidence to sort of support the way you think about yourself and the world around you. At the same time, your mind deliberately discounts any evidence to the contrary. So any proof points that support a different story to your well-worn thinking or outright contradict your repetitive thoughts either won't consciously land with you, you simply won't recognise or acknowledge that evidence, or your mind will argue with it, using a biased stack of evidence that it has in its arsenal to push you back in the direction of your well-worn thoughts. Now, the majority of the time, this selective evidence process happens at a subconscious level, right? So you won't be aware that it's happening. So important point number four is that your mind has an unconscious bias, right, which seeks evidence to prove that your repetitive thoughts are true. The fifth and final thing to understand is that you are highly susceptible to negative thought. The National Science Foundation's research confirms that on average, 80% of our thoughts are negative, right? So your brain naturally pays more attention to bad things than good things. In addition, neuroscientific evidence has proved that our brains produce a greater neural processing response to negative stimulus than positive stimulus. So negative stuff just has a much greater effect on us, we react more strongly to it. Again, the reason for this links back to evolution and our survival instincts. Much earlier in human history, paying attention to the bad things meant people stayed alive for longer. While we don't face the same kind of dangers in the Western world today, your brain is still wired to operate like a threat detection system, always on red alert and on the lookout for danger. And so it pays more attention to the negative stuff in an age-old mechanism to keep you safe from harm. So important point number 5 is that your brain has a strong negativity bias and it reacts more strongly to negative than positive stimulus. Now, these 5 brain science points explain the mechanics of the way your brain and mind operate, but to help you understand how they come together to create imposter syndrome, I'm going to walk you through a real life example from an old client who I'll call Jill, because that is not her name. To give you a little background, Jill was 42 and she had suffered for years from a serious lack of self-confidence. All right, she told me that she was constantly doubting herself and her abilities. She had this pervading concern that she was going to get something wrong. And she was terrified of presenting, like, even though it was a core part of her job and she'd done it many times before without a hitch. Now, Jill described feeling kind of overwhelmed with anxiety. And she told me that she often gave away or hid from a lot of work opportunities to avoid being found out. Now, I asked Jill how long she'd felt like this, and I got her to track back to her earliest memory of feeling inadequate, incapable, or like she'd got something wrong. And after some thought, Jill recalled being 13 years old and having an awful experience giving a presentation at school. Well, she hadn't thought about this in years. When I asked her to elaborate, she said at the time she'd stood in front of the class and she just couldn't do it. Right? She ended up with her hands physically shaking in front of everyone, like stumbling over her words, feeling really uncomfortable and embarrassed, and in her view, totally failing at it. As we chatted this through, it also caused Jill to recall her parents making a very deliberate point of not putting her on show in front of other people, right? They told her that they wouldn't make her perform, for want of a better word, for others. Jill realised as she described this that whether intended or not, she kind of picked up a subliminal message that being on show was a bad thing and something to be avoided. Now, to explain why Jill ended up with relentless self-doubt in her 40s, let's get back to the brain science and connect the dots. So as I said at the start of this podcast, imposter syndrome is born out of tough experiences and influences. For Jill, it was twofold, right? She had a distressing experience giving a presentation at school, and whether by design or not, her parental influence had left her with a subconscious belief that being on show was a bad thing and to be avoided. Because the experience and influence were negative for Jill, her brain reacted strongly to it, right? And its negativity bias meant her mind chose negative thoughts in response. So Jill began thinking thoughts like, I've failed, I'm not good enough, the class thinks I'm stupid, the teacher thinks I'm useless, I'll never be able to do this, I'm a terrible presenter, I need to avoid presenting, and so on. Then her brain's repetitive thought process kicked in, right, encouraging her mind to keep thinking those same thoughts. So she continued to think, I failed, I'm not good enough, I will never be able to do this, I need to avoid presenting at all costs. In support of this repetitive thought, her mind's selective evidence bias meant she started seeking proof points in her old and new experiences to back up those negative thoughts. So Jill started trawling back through her memory to find other instances where she'd got something wrong and failed. So it meant that she often relived and dwelled on a time that she got a slightly lower mark in a test. A time where she fell over a hurdle at school on the track and the class had laughed at her. The time when her friend had called her an idiot for mistaking Canada for America on a world map. In the same vein, her selective evidence bias meant that she was also on the lookout for new evidence to support her negative thoughts. So every single day, her mind was on red alert for any proof point, however big or small, even if it was a mere suspicion that someone thought something bad about her or her abilities. So even if there was no actual evidence, her mind was still clocking up those things as supposed proof points. Now, to make this even worse, Jill's selective evidence bias also meant that her mind started discarding or arguing with any evidence to the contrary. So when she got good feedback or something good happened, which was often the case, Jill's mind either ignored it or argued with it by quickly replaying the negative memories and thoughts in its arsenal, dragging her back to her now familiar negative thought patterns. As Jill continued to experience biased, repetitive, negative thoughts, physiologically, the neural pathways in her brain associated with those thoughts kept getting stronger and stronger until they became the dominant physical channels in her brain. Before she knew it, Jill had created deep neural pathway trenches which had become the quick and easy pathways for her mind to connect to. They were simply the first port of call. So now, Jill's brain was physically wired to support a negative way of thinking about herself. Right? One she believed because she had all the evidence in the world to back it up. Justifiably, it felt like the truth to her. What had started out as one seemingly small negative experience and one subconscious influence had developed into a steadfast belief that she was inadequate, a fraud, and likely to get something wrong. And so, imposter syndrome was born. Now, let's take a breath here, because this might feel like a really depressing story, right? And hopefully it's connected the dots for you. You can see how this stuff comes about. But fear not, there is really good news. As I said at the start, it is absolutely possible to remove imposter syndrome, no matter who you are or how long you've had it. And to explain why, I'm going to revert back to point number 1 in the brain science bit. Your brain is not hardwired. Right? Your mind has the power to physically alter your brain. The exciting thing about your brain's plasticity is that you can actively and consciously use your mind to rewire it. The very fact that your brain is malleable and changes with every new thought, experience, emotion and belief that you have means that you can reprogram yourself to believe new things and see things differently. You can train your brain to form and strengthen new neural pathways and permanently change how you think about yourself. Your brain's neuroplasticity is the key. So that begs the big question of how, right? How do you retrain your brain? Well, I'm going to give you a simple 3-step exercise to get you going. All right? If you do this, you will genuinely create new neural pathways that serve you better. And with repetition, they will eventually become the new trenches in your brain, causing you to think, feel and behave differently so that you get much better outcomes. What's not to love? So if you're up for it, grab a piece of paper and a pen, as step 1 is all about recognizing what it is you are telling yourself. So I'd like you to take a little time to think about something that you really want to have or achieve. Right? It could be a personal or professional thing. For example, do you want to find the right partner? Do you want to build deeper friendships or get that promotion or get fitter or healthier, learn a new skill, change career, build your own business, and so on. So just think about something you really, really want. Once you have a goal in mind, I want you to embody your own inner critic and write down all the reasons why you might not be able to have or achieve that thing, right? Really go to town with this, be the devil on your own shoulder and scribble down the reasons, whether they are self-judgments, what you imagine other people will think about you or what you believe you're lacking compared to other people. Just be honest with yourself and really lay it out. So, for example, you might end up with things on the list like, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm too old, they'll think I'm crazy, I can't compete, other people have got more time or money or skills, or, I won't be supported in this. So take some time, write all of those reasons down. And once you have your list, go through it and choose the reason that feels the worst, right? The one that feels like a massive punch in the gut. When you've chosen it, step 2 involves turning that thought around to its total opposite. So for example, if the chosen thought was, I'm not good enough, it would become, I am good enough. If it was, I can't compete, it would become, I can compete. If it's, they'll think I'm crazy, it would become, they won't think I'm crazy. You get the picture. So basically just switch it around to the total opposite. Then for step 3, I'd like you to write down 3 specific examples or proof points that back up that opposite statement, right? So the examples can be big or small, personal or professional, and from any time over your lifetime, right? Everything is valid. So if you were finding examples for I am good enough, you might write things down like, because I put my partner's needs before mine the other day, because I worked hard and qualified in my field despite the challenges, or because I was a good friend to Rob last week. It absolutely does not matter what the examples are. They just need to feel like they're pretty true, right? So try and ensure where you can that your proof points are as specific as possible. Right? Avoid vague statements where you can, simply because being specific means it has more impact. So as you try and sit and think about and write down 3 examples, just be aware that your mind will not like this exercise very much, right? It will try and tell you that there are no examples, this, and you're all out, and that is totally normal. Just notice your mind's resistance to the exercise, almost thank it for its concern, and have a go anyway. Right? Just sit with it and keep going until you have 3. Now, you might be wondering what the point of this is, but every single time you find proof points for the total opposite of any unhelpful or negative thought, physiologically, you're creating a new neural pathway in your brain. Now, exciting, right? Now, these neural pathways are obviously very light compared to the old trenches associated with your repetitive negative thoughts. But with practice and repetition, you'll strengthen those new neural pathways until eventually they become the trenches and the path of least resistance for your mind. And at that point, you'll just think differently, right? And in a way that serves you better. So the key with this is to keep practicing it every single day. If you do, it will eventually become an unconscious habit until you've rewired your brain to simply operate that way. So I always suggest to clients that they find at least one example for that opposite statement every single day and write it down. Have a notebook, stick it by your bed, do it once a day. Just keep going, keep adding, no matter what those examples are. And and whilst this exercise might seem overly simplistic, it is genuinely the most powerful way to change your thinking. So give it a go. That is it for this episode. I really hope that it's helped demystify imposter syndrome and help provide some hope and practical steps if it's something you personally suffer with. And if you know of anyone else who would benefit from listening to this episode, please do share it with them. And until next time, just know that I believe in you and your ability to dissolve imposter syndrome once and for all, so that you can go after the work and personal goals that you really want without any issue.
Thank you for listening today. I hope our time together has got you thinking about your own adventure in happiness. So please do get in touch. I'd love to hear more about your story. And why not join our Dream Chasers Unite community? There is nothing better than an adventure shared. Until next time, be brave and go create what you crave.